Welcome back to our Season 1, Episode 7, Caregiving Club Newscast for the week of May 11th. This is our first newscast for May. And as we start with Caregiver Wellness News, we are celebrating Older Americans Month, but we're also celebrating National Travel and Tourism Week, which is May 3rd through the 9th. And so we have a New York Times article that recently was done on great apps that help people who have disabilities travel easier. And then I add a few commentary on some other programs and services out there that I think are really great for both older adults and family caregivers, including something called respitality, which you may or may not know about. We're going to share it with you and how it really helps caregivers get the break, get the vacation that they need. Also in Caregiver Wellness News, we have a new study out on the sandwich generation, getting a lot of attention these days. And it was a study that came out that said sandwich generation gets 1/3 of the self-care me time that just the general population gets. Not a surprise, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, turning to our brain health, we have two pieces of information and some research that recently came out. One was a possible connection between menopause and dementia risk. And the other is, the omega-3 supplements that we were all told are so good for us, right? Fish oil and all this stuff. Well, maybe not as we get older. So we're going to discuss that. And then, of course, we go into our Well Home Design News. And we're going to talk about something called a visitability checklist. You may not have heard of it, but if you've got older parents or in-laws or grandparents visiting you this summer, you want to make sure your home is high on the visibility checklist, and we'll tell you what that's all about. Also, in this space, we have new legislation. I told you I don't talk a lot about policy, and now it seems like every episode I do on this newscast, I'm telling you about new legislation, but I think it's interesting, and we'll see where it all goes. But we do have new legislation for helping bring in home and community-based services into the homes of older adults, as well as helping out family caregivers. So that'll be interesting there. And then in caregiving in the workplace, there was a really great article in Fast Company I wanted to share with you. And it was all about, everybody talks about how do we be healthier and happier as we age. I think this is going to surprise you. We're going to tell you what Fast Company found based on some research and studies that have come out lately. And it really ties into something I wrote about in my book, Me Time Monday, which is called flow theory. So we're going to tell you what that's all about. And then again, more legislation. I can't get away from it. There has been some new legislation about how family caregivers might be able to get Social Security credits while they're caring for a loved one. Very interesting. And then finally, in pop culture, as I mentioned, May is Older Americans Month. So we have got two different takes on celebrating our older adults. One is from British royalty, and the other one is from fashion royalty. So with that, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all of these newscasts, as well as our regular podcasts, which are interviews with experts, other content that we do, like educational webinars and all kinds of, self-care, how-to in 7 minutes videos that we do. We got all kinds of stuff for you on YouTube. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and you'll get a notification every time we bring out something new. So with that, let's go to our Caregiver Wellness News. For our Caregiver Wellness News, I want to start by, first of all, taking a look at the National Travel and Tourism Week, which is May 3rd through 9th. And there's a great article in the New York Times recently about some apps that are out there to help people who have disabilities travel more easily. So I'm going to just give you a quick, overview of what that article said. But then I want to also add some of my own commentary about things that I know are very helpful for older adults as they travel, but also their family caregivers. So let's start first with this New York Times article that came out, and it did indicate in the article there's 70 million Americans who are living with a disability. Those can be people of any age, of course. And Google Maps is really interesting. So a gentleman who had an accident and became paralyzed from, I think, the waist down, is in a wheelchair, now heads up the division of Google Maps that looks for accessibility. So, where are there wider doors or ramps or other things that you can find on Google Maps that really relate to all of the challenges that people who are in wheelchairs or have walkers or even, have canes and mobility issues have to think about. So that's a great resource just right there, knowing that Google has that and you can go ahead and search for that. But beyond that, what does help people with disabilities travel? So here were the apps that the New York Times identified. The first one is AVIV Scout Route. Now, this is for people who have both limited mobility or also vision issues. And of course, we know as we age, our vision gets a little bit less clear. But it's relying on user feedback and AI to account for factors like sidewalk width, steepness, surface composition, curb ramps, and landmarks. So what it's really identifying for you are things that might be coming up as you walk. I'm sure it's probably somehow integrated with Google Maps, although it didn't say that. But this is just helping you understand, and based on where you go maybe more regularly. So it's not just for travel. It could be just within your own community too. But it does help because it gets all the feedback from people who are traveling or walking along these, these places. Be aware of this, be prepared. This is coming up in 100 feet or whatever it happens to be. So that's a good one. Another one is called Roll Mobility. Now, this one is really interesting because you can ask it questions like, does this restaurant have carpet? And as we know, people who are in wheelchairs and have walkers and canes struggle a lot with carpet because you can trip. It's really hard to push that wheelchair across carpet, whether you're the person in the wheelchair doing it or even for your family caregiver to kind of push you across the carpet. But it also has, is this hotel ADA friendly? Are the bathrooms upstairs or downstairs without access to any kind of elevator, which I know it's unbelievable in this day and time to think about that because the American Disabilities Act came into play in the 1990s and pretty much everybody complied. We saw a lot of changes, the dropped curbs on sidewalks and all of that. But there's still some buildings, older buildings, and proprietors and people out there that aren't necessarily thinking about these things. So you can run into these restaurants, particularly again in maybe older parts of certain cities like New York City or Chicago, where you're not going to have that accessibility, and this app is going to help you identify that. And they have over 20,000 places in 100 countries are evaluated on this app. So pretty comprehensive. The third one is called Be My Eyes. They have over 1 million users who have blindness or low vision. And they have 10 million volunteers. So what this does is you sign up. And let's just say, you're traveling, you're going to Italy, you're looking for a particular pizzeria, and you're not quite sure. What you can do is you can go to Be My Eyes, and either a person who has become a volunteer on this app might be in your location and they'll say, hey, I'll join you in 5 minutes and I'll walk you over there. Or they will just, FaceTime with you or call you on your phone and say, here's where you need to go. Go 100 steps, turn right, or whatever. So to kind of help you find your way around the city when things aren't quite working out. So that's a really interesting one, mostly, again, for people with vision issues. And then finally, the fourth one is called Wheel the World. I like this one because I've actually seen it before, heard really good things about it. But they put together travel packages that are completely ADA accessible transportation, tour guides, very sensitive to certain things, certain disabilities, particularly with older adults. And they specialize also in, like, let's just say you're going to go to Lake Como and everybody's going to get into the lake. Well, you're in a wheelchair. How are you going to do that? Well, they have amphibious wheelchairs, which I think is fabulous. And adaptive kayaks. So let me tell you, if there's a will, there's a way. This is a really great group because they really focus on that speciality in travel, making sure that all those things are available so you can still play out your bucket list or your dreams or whatever. So a great article. We'll have a link to it on our episode or our newscast page for this episode. I wanted to also add that for those of you who like Airbnb, you may or may not know this, but they have added a filter for accessibility and ADA compliant homes. So, for instance, you know that you can't do stairs, or at least you need a home that has also an elevator or a lift. And now you can filter for that on Airbnb, and it'll bring up all of the different locations and homes that will be, obviously accessible for you. So that's pretty cool. I think what that shows me too is that there's greater sensitivity and greater acknowledgement now that we have a large population of older adults. We do have people of, as I said, any age who have a disability, and they still love to travel. They still love to do things, and so we have to hopefully help them as much as we help everybody else with some of these filters and things. And then one of the thing about traveling with an older adult, and this is traveling even with somebody who has dementia, usually early stage or even mid stage. It gets very hard, obviously, to travel with somebody in later stage because they're really not mobile at all. If they've been recently diagnosed and you want to take them with you on a family trip or wherever, you can't do it. The big word is plan. Big words, sorry. Plan ahead. Two big words. Plan ahead. Now, most of us do plan ahead for travel, but we don't always think about the issues and the things that are needed to make sure that the accessibility or the comfort of our loved one is there. So let me give you a great example. I do a lot of airport travel, and I was recently in my local airport here, which I really love, but I noticed that they had put up different sections in a couple different parts of the airport that had like kids, like gymboree kind of stuff, not a bouncy house, but little slides and little things where they could play and all that kind of stuff. It's great, if you have to wait, and particularly if you have to go get in line 3 hours before your flight takes off, right? That's really tough with kids and keeping them focused so they can kind of go play. However, for people who are older, who need quiet, I like my quiet time, it become really stressful to be sitting near, and sometimes those are the only seats available, sitting near one of these little playground things. So I realize, I get they have to be there, but what some airports don't get is you also need some quiet zones, particularly if you're traveling with someone with dementia, because we know that the noise, can really be disruptive for people who are neurodivergent, who have autism, even people who have mental health issues or things like ADHD, but particularly also people who have Alzheimer's or dementia. Having to sit next to the little school ground over here is not going to be good. So we really need to think about that. So I came across a resource, but actually it's in the UK. Usually Europe is a little bit ahead of us on all of these aging experiences and programs and services. We kind of follow, which we should be leading, but anyway, they have now codes for their airports and airlines to be dementia-friendly airports. Now, there are a couple airports here in the U.S. One was Kansas City, did a pilot. There was another one, I can't remember if it was Biloxi, Mississippi. Anyway, it was somewhere in Mississippi, did a pilot. It hasn't obviously rolled out yet, but they are piloting things like this. So, yay, we're getting there. But let me tell you a story from my first book, which is called A Cast of Caregivers. And I interviewed different people, and I interviewed Sylvia Mackey, who was the wife of John Mackey, who happened to be an NFL superstar. If you're a football fan and you're of a certain age, you know who John Mackey is. He was a Super Bowl Hall of Famer, Mr. 68, because that was the number he wore on his jersey. He played for the Baltimore Colts for most of his career. I think he played a couple seasons for San Diego as well. But he developed frontotemporal dementia around the age of 60. Very similar, by the way, to Bruce Willis. That's the same type of dementia that Bruce Willis has, FTD. And what happened to them is they used to go to the Super Bowl every year because they would bring back the Hall of Famers like John to, sign autographs and do certain things. So they were on their way to a Super Bowl this one year, and John had started to really progress in the disease, and it was becoming tougher and tougher for Sylvia. They're standing in line, right? Standing in line. She hadn't even thought about calling ahead because she hadn't had this struggle with him before. And so they're standing in line waiting for the TSA, and John's becoming really fidgety and anxious and asking her all these questions like, where are we? And he looks at that time where you walk through, we still do, we kind of walk through the the TSA, what do you call it? The archway kind of thing, right? That like, scans you. And in his mind with FTD, he saw it as a goalpost. And being the Hall of Famer that he is, and he was a running back, he took off running. And I mean, this 60-year-old man, or he was 61 maybe at the time, sprinting through the airport. Sylvia is screaming because she realizes, oh my gosh, there are, security guards who are armed here that are supposed to take down people who are running through the airport like, a madman. And he did see one guard that she thought maybe even had drawn his weapon. So she's crying, she's yelling, don't do anything, my husband has, dementia. And he makes it through the goalpost, does his little victory dance, pretends to spike the football, big smiles on his face, and everybody is just like, what just happened? Anyway, they take him back. They finally figure out this man does have dementia. He's not trying to, kick somebody out at the airport. And he's signing autographs, and he's just happy camper, had no realization how serious it could have been. Sylvia, of course, is, I can't deal with this anymore. It's a really great reminder that those shouldn't be reasons that you shouldn't travel. But what you do have to do is you have to call TSA ahead of time. You've got to get the special security escort so that you can bypass, and this isn't just for celebs. You can bypass the TSA. They do a private, little screening of you. They know what's going on. So hopefully they put out a communique. We do have travelers with dementia. Please be alert. Please be aware. They're not going to harm anybody or, whatever, but just be aware. And all of that. But, you can do that. And even if you don't have somebody with dementia or it's yourself or you're traveling, you're older, it's hard to get through the airports. I mean, my goodness, normally what I've been complaining about lately is for some reason, all of my connections should be like 5 minutes. And if you sit on the tarmac, and I'm joking, but they are like less than an hour sometimes, like 52 minutes. I had one recently. It was an hour and 20. I thought I was in good shape. We sat on the tarmac in my hometown airport for 45 minutes. And every minute that clicked by, I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm not making it. Ran to the gate. And at my age, believe me, running is not easy. And I'm huffing and puffing, and it said flight closed. Like they'd already boarded everybody. And I didn't do my usual, use a bad word, but I dropped my bags and I said, you've got to be kidding me. Run it out. So thankfully, the gate folks who were there said, you're on this flight. And I said, yes. And I'm so sick and tired of missing my flights. And they called. And I think what happened is I heard from a passenger later, they called the pilot to see if he had started the engines. There seems to be, I think, a rule that if the pilot has started the engines, then they can't, the jetway is definitely closed. They're not letting anybody else on. So I think that's what she did. I think she called the pilot. Hopefully, or gratefully, I guess, he had not turned on the engines. So they ran me down the jetway there, and I got on, and I'm sure everybody on board was really irritated with me, thinking it was my fault. It wasn't my fault, folks. It was the airlines. Okay, I'm telling you, it was my previous flight. Anyway, this seems to be happening more and more. And as I said, if you're older, we're not sprinting through airports, and unfortunately, they do not have, they don't seem to follow the passengers, so they didn't have somebody waiting there with a cart that I could have jumped on, and they would have flown me down, in the cart. You can do those again. You can plan for those ahead of time, but what if you don't know? What if you know you're going to sit on the tarmac for a whole hour waiting for your flight to take off, right? Sometimes you can get the flight attendant on your current flight and the pilot, and they'll call ahead. But I got to tell you, that's a sometimes. Okay, doesn't always happen. Okay, so anyway, that's just going ahead. 2 words, and then finally, I want to talk about respitality because a lot of people don't know about this. And it's kind of one of those best kept secrets. So here's the deal with respitality. If you want to, let's just say you want to take a vacation to Disney World with the kids, but you've got your mom and she lives alone and you don't want to leave her alone, and she doesn't want, somebody she doesn't know coming into the house while you're gone, which is understandable. That would be a home care person maybe that you bring in. What you can do is a couple of things. So respitality is where you would actually call up maybe a nearby assisted living, or even if your loved one has dementia, you could call up the memory care unit of an assisted living community, see if they have any availability, and then you can check your mom in. And it could be overnight, it could be for a weekend, it could be for a week. I think they do it up to maybe like 2 weeks. You pay per night, just like you would in a hotel, but you've got the peace of mind. Okay, she's in a place, she's going to be watched. There are people here who know, she's got to take her medications and she's got to do this and avoid these foods or whatever it is. There's something cool about it too. It could be a test drive for maybe what you might have to face, which is maybe she can't live alone anymore. The best, choice would be maybe moving her into assisted living. Well, having that be so abrupt can be very devastating, and it can be very depressing to the older adult. But maybe if they do a test drive, they go over there, they join an art class or something, and they kind of like it, and maybe, like the people, don't like it, and say, I never want to go back there again. Okay, fine. Now we know. But whatever it is, you can do that. So this hospitality thing is really cool. It's something to definitely check out. The other thing you could do, I mentioned home care, right? So you could actually, if you thought your loved one could withstand the, whether it's an airline flight, maybe you're taking the train, although trains are tough for older adults. They really don't have a lot of the universal design, ageless stuff going on at the train stations and everything. Or maybe it's a road trip from California to Florida to see Disney World. If you think your loved one can at least survive the trip to get there, then of course, are you going to sit them on a bench in Disney World while you run around with the kids? I don't know. Maybe they want to do that, but the other thing you can do is you can get home care sometimes to come to the hotel. So you get them a separate room. You have home care come in and look on them. Roll them down to the restaurant. Maybe even sit and be their companion. Talk to them, and while they eat their lunch or whatever, while they're waiting for you to get back from Disney World. So lots of different ideas out there. I know it's tough because it's a lot more work, a little bit more challenging, obviously more budget and costs to incur, but there are things and ways to do it. So that's my information on that. Also, check out our new podcast that just dropped this week with Debbie Dotson. She's our great friend who gave us our CES Age Tech Gadgets and Apps overview last season. We have her on, but she's also the Ageless Adventurer. She is a solo ager traveler, and she explains what that is. But she has an ageless. I'm sorry, she's the Ageless Adventurer. She has a service now where she is helping older adults, particularly if they are solo agers. Like, she's married. She told me, I didn't know she was married. I thought she was a solo ager like me, unmarried. She's got a husband who just refuses to travel. He's not doing it. He's retired, never going anywhere. I think he traveled a lot for business. And Debbie loves to travel. So anyway, check out that podcast. It is season 6, episode 68 with Debbie Dotson. And that's on all of our listening channels for our podcast, but also you can watch the video version here on YouTube as well. So let's move on in Caregiver Wellness News now to the sandwich generation. There was a study, actually a survey, I should say, that recently came out in the UK. And they surveyed over 2,000 people. Now, I told you before about, as somebody who's a gerontologist, as I am, and we study how to look at research, and we go into the methodology. I always try to do that. I look at the methodology to make sure, okay, is this just one of those fly-by-night? They basically looked at 5 people over 2 weeks, and now they're going to say it extends to everybody in the population. No. So 2,000 is a really good cohort. It's a big group, as we say. And they did do this over a series of, I think it was a few months. So that's good too, time-wise. It wasn't just a couple of weeks, which is, again, tough to do. But here's what they looked at. They wanted to know how the sandwich generation which of course, as we define it, it's people who are caring for children as well as caring for older parents, in-laws, or grandparents at the same time. So squeezed in the sandwich in the middle. But they wanted to know how the sandwich generation was shaping up vis-a-vis other caregivers who were just maybe caring for a spouse or maybe caring for one older parent, the kids gone and all that, as well as just the general population. So they had kind of 3 different cohorts that they looked at. And here's what they found, and this was really not too surprising, but I think, again, any data we can get is helpful. We know that the sandwich generation has particular challenges because of the 2 generations, and it's both an emotional tug of war, but it's also financially a tug of war too, because usually they are financially taking care of both of these generations, plus their own retirement planning and all that. But they found that caregivers only get 8 days. I think I'm reading this correctly. 8 days during the whole year to themselves. Basically, 8 days of 8 hours, wake time, to do me time or self-care or whatever. Which, first blush, you go, well, 8 days? That's not too bad. But it's only 1/3 of what most people get. Okay? So they are getting far less time to practice these self-care things. And we keep telling them to do, just do some self-care. I try to be sensitive because I talk about self-care all the time, but I realize we have time poverty as caregivers. You've got no time to do anything. But anyway, so definitely far more less hours to even think about taking care of themselves. And yet probably the subset of the caregiving population that needs the most me time, right? They need the break. They need the mental health, digital detox time. What else they said is 48% said they definitely sacrifice me time. Okay, while caregiving, of course. 67% said it took a toll on their mental health. So, we've seen the numbers on mental health just like skyrocket. Back in the 1960s, 3% of the population was diagnosed with any type of mental health issue. Whether that be bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, even some neurodivergent things like autism or ADHD or some of these things. Now, some people say, well, we're so much more educated now about mental health, so more people have come forward to raise their hand to say, yeah, I've got some issues, because before you just wanted to hide it in the shadows. You didn't want to be stigmatized or be cut out of things because of it. So that certainly could explain some of the increase, but we're at 22% of the adult population in the U.S. has a mental health illness. That's huge. And we know that there are a lot of factors. Some of it's technology and certainly social media, particularly for teens. We've seen the devastation in our younger generation there. I wrote about this in my book, by the way. I hate to say that I feel good about this because there's nothing good about it. But I feel like, okay, I wrote my book. It came out 3 years ago. The research was done 2 years before that. So 5 years ago, I was talking about this. Nobody's talking about it. It's like, yeah, it's bad. But, you cannot be a junkie and an addict on social media. It's going to take you down mental health wise. But, also I think the nutrition, the lack of socialization, because now, again, we're using our digital tools instead of being in real life with people. It's all not great. 66% of these sandwich generation caregivers said it took a toll on their physical health. 36% felt completely overlooked by society. Okay, so more than a third. That's not surprising, because I hate to say it, they are overlooked, right? Who thinks about the sandwich generation on an ongoing basis and what we can do to help them? Not a whole lot of people. More than half, 51%, said they feel stressed. 45% struggle to relax. 37% have no opportunity to engage in their own interest, and 16% of them feel guilty about it. Like, even thinking that they're missing out on me time, it's not much about that. And if they do happen to take, a break and get a coffee with a friend or whatever, they feel guilty about that. So guilt and grief, which I call the twin G's of caregiving, you need to eliminate that, right? Got to get rid of those 2 feelings. There's some techniques I have. I do some webinars. I do stuff in my workshops about this that I do for employees. So again, easy to say, harder to do, but once you start to understand the stages of grief, the psychology behind guilt, uh, and by the way, it's not really guilt, it's regret. That's an interesting little nuance, but I'm going to leave that as a teaser for my workshops and webinars where we talk about that. But anyway, it's something that we need to help our caregivers with, because clearly they need the break in order to keep going and keep, performing this job, which is essential, by the way, to the healthcare and long-term care systems in the US. We've got to help give these caregivers a break. So just continuing on really quickly, last two things in our Caregiver Wellness Days I want to share with you. As you know, my expertise is more in neuroscience, so I do a lot of things around brain health or dementia and Alzheimer's news. So I want to bring two things to your attention. One is that there are some possible connections, it's still being researched, but possible connections between, we know that women represent 66% of all dementia cases, all Alzheimer's cases are women. Why? Right? Why do more women get Alzheimer's than men? Okay. Tons of research being done on this. Lots of hypotheses. Nothing yet that's come out as solid. Okay, we're going to draw a straight line between you did this or this is happening in your body and then you got dementia. But there certainly are starting to look like more than just correlation, which is they might be connected, causation, which is yes, because of this happened. So we're getting closer to these answers. But Yale is doing right now a perimenopausal dementia study because they understand the changes in women's brains, and they're looking at that whole hormonal journey of perimenopause can last years. I know for me, it lasted at least probably 7 years, maybe longer. So we want to take a look over that whole long-term longitudinal study of those years, what happens in a woman's brain, and then how many of those women ultimately go on to maybe be diagnosed with dementia. We also know, this is interesting, if you go through menopause later in life, and later in life means, I think the average is 52 years old for women. So let's say, more than 52 years old, maybe later in your 50s or whatever, it actually could be a protective factor for dementia. And the reason why is, of course, estrogen levels. We know estrogen actually does help with brain health and also with possibly, forming some kind of blocker to that beta amyloid plaque and those tau tangles that attack the brain cells and then lead to a dementia diagnosis. We also know that estrogen reduces insulin resistance, which is the belly fat that we all get around our ways, or I'm saying everybody because it's me. But, lots of women and men have that insulin resistance, and it happens to a lot of women after menopause. Again, raising my hand. And it's really hard to tackle, but now, we know that insulin resistance can also increase your risk for dementia. So, not good. And then this is, something I wrote about actually for PBS a few years ago. And it's basically the caregiving strike zone, right? Many women are going to go through perimenopause or menopause while they're also caregiving. Isn't that a bonus for you? You have two big things going on. One is just the hormones changing and facing all the things that your body will or won't do anymore. And you got to deal with the caregiving at the same time. Anyway, so I wrote an article about that and the special challenges that women have, particularly if they're tackling both of these things. And just, again, it's another reference point to employers, to family members, to neighbors, to friends, whatever, that, there might be a lot going on in this caregiver's life that isn't just caregiving. It could be financial struggles. It could be menopause. It could be a lot of things. So we just want to be gentle and kind and supportive with all that. The other thing about brain health is the omega-3 supplements. This is really interesting because it's been pretty well defined now that these omega-3 supplements have, fish oils, because we're talking about the fatty fish, the salmon, mackerel, sardines, anything that really is associated with the Mediterranean diet, which is now kind of the foundation for the MIND diet, which is the brain healthiest diet that you can adopt. We've talked about that before. And you can find more information. Again, I've got some podcast experts like the Brain Health Kitchen Cookbook Dr. Annie Fenn, check the podcast out. That is a great podcast to talk about this mind diet. But we know that those things are good, right? We know that those things are going to be brain health protective. We know they are going to possibly reduce our risk for dementia later in life. So that's all really good. However, this is really interesting. Now this study was done in China. It was done with 800 participants. It's a little low. I like to see 1,000 people at least. And they did have half of the cohort had the APOE3 gene, which is the risk factor for dementia. Now, we all have the APOE4 gene, so you know. However, if the switch is flipped on that chromosome, on that particular little part of your chromosome, that is how you get this greater risk for, and probably will develop Alzheimer's later in life. Anyway, study found. So it's just interesting to note. Taking a supplement, so not the eating of the fish, which is still good. And I always say, try to get your vitamins and supplements from natural food. Taking a whole bunch of supplements is it's not always good for your digestive health and your microbiome, by the way. But taking a supplement had the opposite effect for Alzheimer's disease when they finally did the score for these people on something called the mini mental state examination, the MMSE, which is basically that's the little survey that we give people. There's a short one and a long one, and we give people who we think have dementia. We do that test. You might do it as a primary care physician, and if they don't score a certain level on that test, they get referred to the neurologist right away because it looks like something's up. But anyway, so the people who had taken the supplements scored way lower on the MMSE, even though other people who still had that gene, that APOE4, but didn't take supplements, were scored higher than the MMSE. Okay, so there was also a systemic review that was done last year. And what they found is that low dose omega-3 supplements, so that is, definitely less than like 1,000 milligrams a day, were probably okay and can help cognition even as you age. However, anything above 1,500 milligrams a day could reverse that effect. And as you get older, and older means over 60, right? As you get older and you're taking that supplement and you're taking 2,000 milligrams or more a day, it could actually hurt your cognitive abilities. So just be aware. I'm not a doctor, so I want to just make that caveat. I am not here to give you medical advice. I'm here to just educate you about what I find as a gerontologist that either alerts me or startles me or something I feel is really important that people should know. It's definitely a good conversation with your doctor, right? You always want to default to talking to your doctor because we're personalized in our body composition, chemicals, hormones, things going on. What might work for me might not work for you. I could tell you something, or you could, look at this study and it won't have any effect on you because you have a different kind of biology and what's going on physicality with you or whatever. So you just definitely want to talk to your doctor about all these things. But it does bring up two things when I do look at studies as well. And I just want to tell you, our health information, thank goodness, is getting better. I know they say stay off the internet, don't Google stuff, Yeah, because you can get really anxious over things that you may not interpret appropriately. And again, it takes a lot of sometimes research and blood tests and all kinds of other things to really determine if you're going to be, susceptible to something. But we're looking at research in two different lenses now. One is gender. It used to be 30, 40 years ago, all the research was done on men in their 40s. And then it was like, oh, yeah, that's good. Okay, so you're a 70-year-old man or a 70-year-old woman. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, that doesn't work. So it's both gender as well as age. And I'm really happy that we are looking at things in that way now because it is so important. We are very different. I study brain health. Men and women's brains are different. Okay, they have a different weight. Women have more tau protein in their brains. Certain gray matter. There's just a lot of differences, and we have to be cognizant of that when we're looking at some of these, answers to our health questions that we have out there. So that's it for Caregiver Wellness News. Now we're going to take you to the Home Design News. our Well Home Design news, I'm going to go back to our National Travel and Tourism Week. And I want to talk about something called visitability, which you probably haven't heard of because there's actually a lot of people in my space and long-term care who haven't heard about it, or even gerontologists. Most of us know about this, but it's kind of a term that hasn't been used a whole lot, but we're seeing it starting to pop up. And what it really means is, how does your home rate on a visitability score if you were to have older loved ones or older friends or whomever come and stay with you, particularly older people who may have mobility issues, again, who might use a walker or a cane or even a wheelchair, somebody who has low vision or even starting to have like maybe blindness from glaucoma, somebody who has hearing issues, all these kinds of things that we see with aging. How aging friendly is your home if they were to come visit? So this is a little different from universal design, which is, of course, something we talk a lot about, which is how do you make your home safe and accessible through the home. But this is more thinking about just the space where maybe, grandma and grandpa might come stay for the weekend. What does their room look like? Are they close to a bathroom that they can get to easily without having to go up and down stairs, maybe late at night? Because, of course, as we get older, more older people do need to use the bathroom at night, that kind of thing. So all of these things are on this checklist, and I just wanted to bring it up because, as people are starting to put their travel plans together, and very often we do have older parents or grandparents who might be coming to visit with us. So it's just, it's kind of interesting. So I'm not going to give you the whole checklist. We do that in one of the webinars that I do. But I will give you some resources and some links and probably have a PDF of the checklist on our Newscast episode page. But I want to give you some of the top tips. So, for instance, lighting, okay? You want to make sure in the bedroom where your loved one is going to stay that there is good lighting if they wanted to read at night, that kind of thing. Also, night lights. Now, we've talked about this just in general before for all of us, but we know blue lights that are night lights are not good. Now, what is a blue light? Well, it's most of the night lights that are out there use some kind of an LED or a type of electric bulb that emits what we call blue light emission. We get a lot of it from our electronics and our digital, our smartphones and computers and TVs and, all kinds of things. So you don't want to get a traditional nightlight. What you want is an amber or orangey or even a red light, because as they need to get up, they need a good pathway to see where they're going, because it's going to be, again, it's a strange place. They're not used to taking this path late at night when they're a little groggy. So you want to make sure that they're safe getting to that bathroom and not, though, awakening their brain so that it disrupts their circadian rhythms and it hurts their brain health. They might be a little foggy the next day if they don't get the right, level of sleep or whatever. So that's a really important one, the lighting. Temperatures. Okay, so here's something interesting. We all know as we get older that we tend, our blood pressure might be a little lower. We don't have as much, quote unquote, fat to insulate. Well, some of us don't. To insulate our bodies from temperatures and stuff. And so we get colder. And one of the jokes that I have is that I remember as a kid walking into my grandparents' home and it felt like a sauna. It felt like we just walked into the rainforest somewhere because it was so overwhelmingly hot. It was because, their body temperatures were lower, and so they were keeping the temperatures higher. Now, this is, of course, not conducive for sleep. And I've talked about this a million times, but if you really want to get good sleep, you've got to have the room be like 67 degrees, 68 degrees. For an older loved one not used to that, because they're probably cranking up that temperature gauge when they get back home, that's going to be really freezing. So you want to be mindful of that. Maybe have an extra blanket Maybe have a pair of socks. It could be like their welcome gift as they arrive. But a pair of socks are great because if you can keep your head, and some people even wear like the little cute knit caps as an older person because you want to keep the top of your head and your feet warm, which is something that I never learned, by the way. I'm just talking to my beloved stepdad who is up there listening to me saying, remember what I used to tell you when we go skiing and you go freezing all the time because you wouldn't wear a cap and you didn't have the right socks and gloves. So anyway, I know, DP, it was bad. But anyway, maybe have a pair of socks that are lovely. I love Barefoot Dreams, by the way, are my favorite because they're all soft and snuggly. But if you do that, you do want to make sure that you've got the pair of socks that if they keep the socks on and go to the bathroom, they're not going to slip and slide, right? So it's got to have like those little rubber things or whatever on the bottom. But you want to keep the temperature cool to give them opportunities to, stay warm. And also, if you have a separate temperature gauge for that room, great. Most people don't, though. They have like an overall home temperature. And but you can also think about maybe a very safe portable heater if you're in certain climes where it gets pretty cold at night and they're used to being a little warmer. Shower safety. Okay, this is one of my favorites, and this is probably the number one thing. If you're not going to do anything else, do this. Your bathroom, which hopefully is on the same floor, don't make older people walk up or down stairs to get to the bathroom at night. It's like, that's asking for trouble. So you want to make sure they're in a bedroom where they can access the bathroom pretty easily. Don't have a lot of clutter if they do have to walk across the kitchen or something. Don't have the kids' toys out. You got to make sure all those aisleways are, clear of clutter that you usually jump over, step over during the day. They're not going to remember or see them at night. But they have mobile grab bars. Okay. Now, most of our bathrooms, probably if we're a little younger or we recently moved into our homes, or even if their homes are just like 10 years old or whatever, they don't have grab bars yet, right? It hasn't been something we've needed or thought about, but definitely have to have them for older folks. Now, you don't need to run out and have somebody install them right away because there are these fantastic portable grab bars. And a lot of people with disabilities actually do travel with them. I have a friend who has MS, and she is still a total adventure traveler, but she takes her mobile grab bars with her because even though a lot of the hotel showers now have ADA compliant rooms that you can ask for, most of them do have a grab bar in there. She just likes taking these with her just to feel that extra safety and also make sure they're positioned properly on the wall because those are just generically placed. And really, when you do have grab bars installed, just a FYI, you do need to have it kind of personalized for you. But anyway, but be mindful that not all mobile grab bars are the same. You can run out to the pharmacy or to Target and you can buy the $10 or $15 ones. Yeah, you might as well just throw them in the trash because they're going to come right out of the wall. You're thinking it's going to take the weight of your loved one if they're falling. It won't. There's a line, a brand I love. I normally, and by the way, I don't get paid by this company, but I should because I talk about them all the time. So if you're listening out there, Mobili, but they're an Italian brand called Mobili. We'll have a link to them. They are a little pricier. I think they're a little over $100, but just think about it. If your loved one does love to travel a lot, or if you think it's worth it for you because your parents or grandparents love to come stay with you, it's worth the investment because they're going to get a lot of use out of them, right? So anyway, that's something to think about. And then finally, the entry into the home, you just want to make sure, again, if your loved one has arthritis or osteoporosis and it's tough to get, downstairs, I have, even talked to people about they've rented ramps. You can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or other places, and you can rent a ramp for the day so that you can get them up the stairs. If they're in a wheelchair, you can wheel them easily or whatever it is. So think about that because, again, we just don't, we're not thinking with their reality, if you will, and it just makes the trip a lot nicer. It makes everything a little bit more accessible. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about in Well Home Design is caregiver training. There's so much training going on now for family caregivers to truly understand how to keep an older loved one at home safely, healthfully, or whatever. So much of what we would normally think of as nursing duties, right? We call it paraprofessional caregiving, wound care, oxygen tank setup, even just, the bathing and toileting of someone who really can't do those things for themselves, making sure they're taking their medication, even helping them maybe with the shot. Um, all of these duties are falling to family caregivers, and yet we're not trained for this. Nobody goes to nursing school. And so you're just thrust right into, the eye of the storm. So there's a lot more caregiver training going on these days. And actually, it has been looked at by CMS, which is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They are who usually reimburse a lot of companies who deliver services because they are helping out the older population and family caregivers. They're now starting to reimburse for caregiver training. Now, the good news is we will be better prepared. I think the bad news is that, boy, they really do want us in our jobs as caregivers. Don't they? Now they're even giving us free training. No, it's all good. It's all good. I'm not going to be a cynic. I'm going to shut that negative part off of me, or off as we talk about this. But a lot of places now, whether it's the hospital discharge or sometimes through a physician or long-term care services, like even if you have a loved one in rehab and they're in a nursing home or assisted living, but now they're going to be transferred back to home, they will help train you. So they bring in trainers, or they refer you to different training, referral sources to get you trained. And then a lot of that, just you don't have to pay for out of pocket. So you may want to check some of this out. If you kind of feel like you're out of your comfort zone, you're not quite sure what to do, and you want to make sure you're doing it all correctly, particularly, as I said, if there's specific things like wound care and stuff, you want to do this training. So there's also something called the CARE Act, which ARP was really behind a few years ago. Most, if not all of the states, I think, passed it. But it actually requires hospitals and long-term care services like nursing homes. Anytime your loved one is going to be transferred back to home for their continued care, it's required that they train you as a family member. Now, sometimes they can. Here's the problem with it. Nobody defined what the training was. Nobody said you have to do 3 hours with this group or whatever, and then that's what it is. No. So it's left up to everybody to interpret, which is never great. So sometimes the discharge planners at hospitals, they'll just give you a sheet like, here's wound care, 1, 2, 3 steps or whatever, which isn't, to me, training. That's just information they're providing to you. But you can look into that. And then also there are some sources. So for instance, the VA is really good. Caregiver resource centers, we have several of them in California. Most states do have some type of a caregiver resource center. You can usually find it through the state office on aging. So you just look up New York State Office on Aging, California State Office on Aging, whatever it is. Sometimes it's called the Accessible Disabilities Department or something. Sometimes they have a slightly different name, but if you Google that, you'll get to the right place, the Office on Aging. Caregiver Action Network, great organization, nonprofit out of Washington, D.C. They do a lot of training. It's mostly, though, more webinars and things, but still helpful and great. They do all that. The American Red Cross, Family Caregiver Training, which is, again, a different outside source, and Trualta, which is a company that I'm a little bit familiar with, and they'll do some training as well. So you can look that up. And hopefully you want to double check that you don't have to pay for this, that it is going to be covered or it is free to you, just because you don't need that expense. And then the ones that you might have to care for that are a little bit more specialized, if you will, there's a place called the Care Academy. Now, they're really great at training professional caregivers. In fact, professional caregivers, of course, home care staff and senior living staff have to go through training every year. They have to keep up their credentials. So they use Care Academy, a lot of them. And then if you're in the dementia world, there are some really great online videos, tutorials, checklists, articles, training workshops. And she's just a guru in the space, Teepa Snow. She does the positive approach to care. but you do have to pay for it. So again, you might want to see if you can get it reimbursed or if they'll cover it. But very often, a lot of the access to her stuff does require some kind of fee. And then more legislation. Okay, so I'm becoming now the policy wonk over here. But I thought this was really interesting. So the U.S. Representative Jen Czakowski, which is the Democrat out of Illinois, and Debbie Dingell, who, of course, is a Democrat out of Michigan. They're in the U.S. House of Congress. They introduced the Home and Community-Based Services Act, CES Act, and this is where Medicaid, who is the primary care payer, by the way, for long-term care services, Medicare does not cover long-term care costs, with very few exceptions. Medicaid does, but you have to qualify for Medicaid, and every state is different. So they do provide most of those services, though, for long-term care. And unfortunately, getting those services, you got to go through a lot of paperwork on waiver programs, and a lot of people are on waiting lists for years. It's totally ridiculous. Okay. I have no idea why we get so backed up, but I think it's all the regulation and the paperwork. And of course, we don't want there to be any fraud. There's fraud. It's everywhere. It's this place. I mean, gosh, listen to the whole Doge analysis and then everything that comes out of the news every day. So, in our healthcare system, there's all this fraud. So we think by being on a waiting list, we're going to avoid that. Well, guess what, folks? No. So let's get this done sooner, right? I'm sorry. I'm not a policy person, so I just don't like bureaucracy. But this new bill, this legislation is supposed to streamline that process so you don't have to wait in the lines. It'll be a lot smoother. Hopefully they'll pick up on more technology to help them make that a little bit more efficient and effective. But that would be nice. So that would be another way then to get some of these services and trainings and other things kind of paid for. So that's it for our Well Home Design News. Now we're going to look at caregiving in the workplace. So turning to caregiving in the workplace, I came across this article from Fast Company, which is really great. We have good stuff to think about when it comes to workers and workplace and all of this. But it was another article, which there have been so many, on, how do we be happier and healthier at work? And, a lot of people joke and say, stop working, which is not true. We're going to talk a little bit about this based on the article. But what the article said, and I think it's both probably something that doesn't surprise you too much, but on the other hand, we're always talking about de-stress, time away from work, don't focus as much on work, have balance in your life, which of course I am not going to negate that. My whole second book was about that. Me Time Monday, how to find balance and joy, wellness week for balance and joy for a busy life. So I totally accept all of those things. However, there have been studies and things that have been done, and this is scientifically backed. And Fast Company kind of they unearthed this. I wouldn't say it's a brand new study because there's been a lot of research in this space, but they were kind of just bringing new light to it. And what it said was the best way to be happier and healthier, particularly with your career or on your job or balancing family and work, is to strive to accomplish something. Now, they even went so far as to say, strive for success. I think it's probably, the incentive. Most people want to be successful at what they do, but just the accomplishment of something that you have in your brain that says, I really want to do this. And often it can be tied to work, or it could be tied to, if you're older, an encore career. Maybe you felt like I had to take this job and make a whole lot of money and capture those benefits because it helped my family. I never loved it. And now I'm semi-retired. Now I want to do something I really, really love. And we'll see how that goes because I don't have to worry as much about the financial success. But I still want it to be successful, right? So anyway, it was a very interesting article, and we'll have the link so you can read it for yourself. But as I read through it, there's a couple things I just wanted to note, and that is that very often, because we become fatigued and overwhelmed and tired when we're caregiving, the only thing we can think of that will make us healthier and happier is to sleep, right? Just let me alone for a little bit, or let me get more sleep. I wish I could get through the night with great sleep. Those are kind of the things that come to mind, I think, for family caregivers. But in the same way that all of us are looking for, no, we want to accomplish something, there's a couple things that we need to think about. One is for family caregivers, we have to start giving ourselves kudos, really. I think that very often it's just, general human nature. We wait around to be told, how great we are or what a good job we're doing. Then that makes us feel great, right? It releases that dopamine hormone so that you feel that reward by being acknowledged and valued, which is really important. It's a key part of our both, our work relationships as well as our personal relationships. But in case we just have to do it ourselves. And I think that if you're a family caregiver and you are giving this loving care to somebody, and no one's paying you, no one's, you're not getting anything else out of this other than the love that you're giving and the satisfaction that comes with that. But we have to say, I'm also accomplishing something, right? When I can get a little task done today, or whether I figured something out with Medicare. Well, it took me 6 months, right, to navigate the system. But if we can give ourselves the kudos of accomplishing something that is tied to caregiving, I think that caregiving, then we might flip the script on the psychology of looking at caregiving as being a drain or something that takes us away from what we love, or doesn't let us get to where we want to be with things we love, doesn't let us get sleep, doesn't let us work out, doesn't let us eat right. We're always looking at the negatives. And I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna now. I know how tough caregiving can be, and it can stretch you to your limits. But in those quiet moments when you do get just a few seconds, give yourself some kudos for being a family caregiver and all the accomplishments. And here's something also, and I've talked about this before, but I think it's really important. For those people who may have taken time off work to be a caregiver, maybe you've taken a leave of absence, or, you left your job thinking I'll go back at some point or do something similar, when this is through. Think about all the skills that you're building while you're a caregiver. You're building patience, whether you want to or not. You're building listening skills. You're building emotional, empathy. You are building skills around research and coordination and of different services and things. You're kind of the center of all of this coordination that needs to go on for your loved one's care. You're a leader. You have to be the continuity in your loved one's care. You have to tell the doctors who forget or didn't mark it right in their notes or whatever, what just happened last time with your loved one, or the fact that no, they already did get that MRI. Why are you saying we have to go for another one? You're the person who kind of is the person that backs up all of that, facts and what really needs to get done to make sure that things are correct. So give yourself a pause and give yourself some kudos. Now, I want to also talk about something else, because a lot of people feel like the way for us to de-stress is through like a digital detox, which I totally agree with. I wrote about Nixon, Niksen, not Nixon, the president, but it is a Dutch concept and philosophy around doing nothing, which I thought was really interesting. And you can read about it in the Me Time Monday book. Also, Hygge, which we know comes from Denmark. So I happen to have some Danish genes, so I feel very proud. But Hygge is around, and by the way, I met a person from Denmark who said, no, you're not saying it right. So I've been practicing Hygge. So she'll probably call me and tell me, nope, you still got it wrong. But it's, basically Hoogah is the, what do you call it? The phonetic, pronunciation, but it's Hygge. And that's a concept around coziness, about, the digital detox for sure. And sometimes being with family, sometimes being alone, but just being warm and cozy, not having any of the technology in our life. So those are definitely the ways to de-stress from both work, but also caregiving, challenges that we have and all that, if you can find that time, which is great. But this whole concept of, you need to just go with the flow. How many times have you heard that? You just need to go, stop stressing, just go with the flow. Don't be anxious. Don't worry about it, whatever. First of all, people I know do get annoyed. I even say that to some of my loved ones. I think I said that to my mom just a couple days ago, which she probably wasn't very happy with. But I was trying to get her to not be anxious over something she was. So I was trying to help her, but I probably didn't. But sometimes you don't want to hear that. It's like, just go with the flow. It's like, yeah, you go with the flow. But what if it flow wrong? So what I wrote about in my book, and this is what I wanted to share with you, and it relates back, by the way, I am going to circle back to why I brought this up with the Fast Company article. Flow theory, which is an actual psychological theory that was put forward by a wonderful psychologist and researcher, and his name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I think he's Czechoslovakian, but he's been doing over like 30, now maybe 40 years of research around the sense of energy and effort and interest and, kind of, entertainment, if you will, or learning a new skill. But what he says is we are at our happiest when we have set out to accomplish something that we really want to accomplish. Now, that could be learning a new instrument, maybe learning how to play the piano after all these years. It could be learning a new language. It could be learning a new recipe because you love to cook. It could be learning more about your rose garden because you love to garden. It could be learning about traveling or doing the traveling. So it's whatever you love. So it's very personalized, but you have it in your life. This is something I love. So I pursue it whenever I can, whenever I do get a few minutes or some me time or whatever, even though I take the baby steps, which we talk about in the book, how to do that. You don't have to tackle it all and speak French tomorrow. But taking those steps makes us feel happier because we're on the pathway to accomplishment. And accomplishment is tied to the dopamine, the hormone of dopamine, which is the reward center in our brain, but also serotonin, which is our feel-good hormones, right? So all of those surge when we feel like we're accomplishing something, even if it's an accomplishment in caregiving. So that is why I'm bringing this back full circle, because the article is spot on. And really, they should have given credit to Mihai, which they didn't. And I was a little disturbed by, because I'm reading the whole article thinking, they got to bring him up. They got to bring him up. He's the god of flow theory. They didn't say flow, though. They didn't, because they don't know. They're not gerontologists. They're journalists. So they needed to call somebody like me. No, just kidding. But, what you need to think about is, it is true. When we do try to accomplish even something super small, maybe it's decluttering. Maybe it's just taking one small little drawer and getting it decluttered, getting it organized or something. We feel so good, right? That is the road to happier, healthier life. We'll have a link to that article, and I'll also have a link to the flow theory stuff from my book. You can check it out and see what you think. Now, back to legislation. My new favorite thing, apparently. No, I keep coming across all this stuff. I swear, it's been months not seeing any new policy stuff, and then all of a sudden there's this flurry of policy things that are crossing my news feed, my desk, and everything. But I wanted to bring this up because I thought this one was really interesting too. This is about retirement credit vis-a-vis your Social Security, benefits and what you're accruing. And what this new legislation brought forward by Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat out of Connecticut, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat out of New York, and then they had some companion legislation from Representative Brad Schneider, also a Democrat out of New York, is they called it the Social Security Caregiver Act. Gives you up to 5 years of Social Security retirement credits for family caregivers who spend at least 80 hours per month providing care to dependent relatives. I think that might also include children, although I didn't read the legislation, so don't quote me on that. I know it definitely includes older parents, in-laws, and grandparents. It might even extend as far as to you're caring for an older sibling or you're caring for an aunt, or an uncle or whatever. So you'd have to read the legislation. We'll have a link to it. But isn't that cool? So now instead of walking away from those benefits because maybe you did take a leave of absence from work, and then not only do you lose your pay and your salary, you lose your bonus, you lose your Social Security credits, you lose your Medicare credits you're building up, you lose all that stuff, right? So this is a way to kind of give back, thankfully, some of those credits. I love it. Let's keep our fingers crossed that something like this passes. Well, a lot of this was tied, by the way, to a report that came out from the Roosevelt Institute that was very kind of disturbing, but I'll just share some of these stats with you. 43% of people age 50 and older think it is likely they will need long-term care in the future. Okay, yep, that's probably true. However, 62% of people mistakenly think that Medicare will cover long-term care costs. If you need to go in assisted living or memory care, or even a nursing home, Medicare covers that. No, they don't. Nursing home, possibly, or an assisted living that's doing rehabilitation. So if you've been in the hospital and you've been discharged, but you can't go home yet, then Medicare will kick in for about 180 days, which is 6 months. But just keep in mind that the average stay for an older adult in assisted living or a nursing home is 3 to 5 years. So you get 6 months paid and the rest is on you. Oh, that's painful. But that is what it is, folks. That's the long-term care situation out there, which is why so many of us keep our loved ones at home and care for them ourselves. Yeah, it's taxing us. It's taking a lot out of us. It maybe even prevents us from making money by going to work or whatever it is. But we look at it as also a savings. We're not spending that cost of care. The other thing that this Roosevelt Institute report found is that families are estimated to pay more than a third, 37%, of the expected costs adults age 65 and older will incur for long-term care, with 14% expected to pay at least $100,000 out of pocket. So this is not cheap, okay? We don't pay enough attention to this. We don't know enough about it. We need that financial education. I think it would be great if maybe employers can help with this, but maybe we should do it in high school or college or something. But we need to get educated about the finances of long-term care, at least how it sits today. Could change, but this is where it is, and this is the cost of care, and it can be devastating, It can really hit families hard, particularly if you haven't planned ahead. Mom and dad don't have that much savings. It's tough. So anyway, but that was all the legislation. At least would give you some credit back in your Social Security benefits, which would certainly be welcome for many people. And I just wanted to share that piece with you. Now, we're going to turn to our favorite, our pop culture segment, and it's all about older Americans and royalty. Stay tuned. For our pop culture segment, I have some really fun news, I think, to share with you. As I said earlier, May, of course, is Older Americans Month, at least here in the U.S. But I'm going to start across the pond over in the UK, in Britain. And just last month, I think it was April 21st, it actually would have been the 100th birthday of Queen Elizabeth had she stayed with us. She almost made it. I think she was 96, so she was almost there. But what was really, I think, very special, and they've been doing this for years, by the way. This isn't the first time. It just had a lot more, maybe, poignancy to it because it would have been her accomplishment as a centenarian, a 100-year-old. The British royal family, including King Charles, as well as Queen Camilla, and the Prince of Wales, William, and his beautiful wife, Catherine, Princess of Wales, as well as some other royals, were all there to celebrate some of the centenarians in the UK. And how sprightly and lively and live wires some of these centenarians were. I watched some of the clips from the ceremony that they had, and they had a woman who helped cut the cake, and I mean they're a scream, but it was just a really nice acknowledgement, I think, of that we are living longer. And we have many more centenarians among us. I'll put something up on the screen which I use in a lot of my speaking engagements and different webinars that I do. But you can see the trajectory of growth of how many more people over the age of 100 we are going to have um, in the US over the next, 20 years or so. In fact, I often talk about 2032 as the watershed moment when all states in the US, right now we have, I think, 12 to 15 states have crossed over where we have more people over the age of 65 than children under the age of 18. First time in US history, first time that has ever happened. And by 2032, every single state in the US, that will be the case. Clearly, we have a lot more older people, and we're living longer. Not always, we talk about in gerontology, we talk about lifespan, which is how long you live, but is our health span, equal to our lifespan? Not always. We might be a little shorter on health span, and we might spend maybe 10 years or more needing some care, some help, or whatever. And then we talk about wealth span. Do we have enough, financial resiliency to last that lifespan? I don't know. But anyway, it's kind of interesting to think about. And just I'll throw a couple more stats at you that might shock you a little bit. And do get some gasps in the audience when I do some speaking engagements on some of these stats, but it's a couple to contemplate. 24% of women who are 60 years old today will live to be over 100. Now, that's barring, of course, any tragic accidents. Of course, there's still going to be maybe certain people who develop disease, but 24% of 60-year-old women will live to 100. So the question you have to ask yourself, or that I ask myself every day, but not too late because it'll keep me up at night. Am I going to be able to survive that long? I mean, do I have the money? How am I going to get up the stairs in my house? I live in a house where you come into the entry, but then you go right up to the main living. You have to do a flight of stairs, which is really great right now. It's great exercise, right? But it's not going to work if I'm 100. So that's a stat that often, kind of blows people away. The other one that's interesting, and this is for you, those folks of you out there who have kids or grandkids, is that 50% of the 14-year-olds right now will have a life expectancy of 104. It's kind of life expectancy is kind of like the average, and the life potential to live to 124. Whew. And this all goes back to if you look at over the decades, in the 19, well, first of all, let's go way back, okay? The ancient Romans, the average age was like 24. Yeah, they weren't living too long back then. So when you read about somebody who was 40, that's like an ancient, that's like the 125-year-olds today for us. Then we go to Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth time, and it almost doubled. The average life expectancy, I think, was a little bit higher, maybe 40 or something. 1900, it was 47. So it took us 1,500 years to double it, to go from 24 in ancient Romans to 48 or 40, 48, 47 years old in 1900. But since 1900, so think about it, 48 years old, and now the kids today are looking to be 104. We've more than doubled it in 100 years. Well, 130, 40, 50 years. But, I mean, hello, you can see why that. Now, it's happening because we have better, understanding of sanitation. We have, obviously, more medical knowledge about health and how it works and what we can do to prevent disease. We have so much more technology. We have things like vaccines. Not all of them great, I will say, but I'm not going to be a, vax denier. Polio vaccines, other vaccines that have really saved a lot of lives out there, obviously, smallpox and other things. So this has all helped us, of course, achieve those longer years. Now the big challenge is, how do we keep the health span and lifespan closer together so that we are more healthy with less years to go, before everything is over. So those are just some things to think about. certainly the celebration, I think, in the UK. And as I've mentioned before, Europe, of course, appreciates older people. They appreciate anything old buildings, old churches, old people. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now that I'm part of that group, I'm very appreciative that you don't tear everything down and rebuild it all shiny, brand new. But you do take time to acknowledge some of the people who have achieved something like being 100 years old. Now let's go to America. Youth obsessed America, right? Where you wouldn't think of anything being old here. First of all, just, we're so tiny. We're in our infancy when you think about all of the great, eras around history and how long these empires or these things have lasted. And we're only at 250 years, although we're very grateful for the 250. Thank you. And, many more to come. But we are still in our infancy, and we are youth obsessed. I mean, it's all about anti-aging, tear that building down, rebuild it, all kinds of stuff. And even the trees. I'm going to just for 1 minute, I have to grouse about something personal. They're tearing out the beautiful pine trees in my community, and they're saying, well, they're not looking too good. Some of them are diseased. Treat them. Treat them. We don't just kill trees. They're good for you. The chloroform is helping to oxygenate the air, which is great for people like me who need more oxygen into our lungs. Everybody needs it, fresh air, right? The trees. I can't stand it. Anyway, I think I am going to become one of those tree huggers that, change myself to the trees next time they start chopping them down. But that's what's happening in America. We might be taking a note from Europe and other places, China, Japan, which is a super ager country, and they have a lot more older people even than we do, about recognizing the wonderful things about being older. And I say that because fashion royalty, meaning Vogue magazine, and yes, Anna Wintour, who is still around, even though she is now semi-retired, I guess. She's the chairman of Condé Nast, which still oversees Vogue, but also other properties that they have, despite the fact that the magazines, of course, we know aren't doing very well. But finally got the memorandum that, being older could be actually kind of cool. And here is what she said, which I thought was a great quote. Age is actually an advantage. Well, thank you, Anna. Finally, for recognizing that, right? And I like to laugh because it's like, well, as you get older, of course you're going to say, age is spectacular. It's the best thing going because you're older. You don't want to be, whatever, ushered out. But the reason why I say this is because recently, to promote the movie The Devil Wears Prada 2, which I haven't seen yet, people have told me it's good, so I'm keeping my critique for later. But there was a New York Times article also around older models at Fashion Week. And so there was Anna Wintour and, of course, the star of the movie, Meryl Streep, are on the cover of Vogue. First time that a 76-year-old woman, actually two 76-year-old women, are on the cover of Vogue. But think about it. And I'm going to have these images put up so you can delight in our wonderful, particularly our older females. Martha Stewart, age 82, on the cover of Sports Illustrated in a swimsuit. God bless her. I don't care what you have to say about Martha, but that woman has some guts. Written on Sports Illustrated in a swimsuit. God bless you, Martha. Iris Apfel, who was one of my favorites, she passed away just about a year and a half or so ago. And she was, I think she was 103 when she passed, but she was 101 and she was doing Target ads and all kinds of other stuff in fashion. She became like this fashion guru. You saw her everywhere. And then, of course, Elon Musk's mom, Mae Musk, she's one of the top senior models, because, of course, we have to put them in their category. But models, get this is what cracks me up. Models who are called senior models are women over 40. Hello. Okay, whatever. That Mae Musk fits into that category, but she's 78 and she looks fantastic. I'm going to just do a shout out, by the way, because it was recently Mother's Day. I'm going to do a shout out to my own mother, who was absolutely fantastically beautiful and in her early 80s. I hope she doesn't mind that I shared that, but she looks like any of these women or better. Okay, so you know what? Age is just a number. And here's something interesting that happened. So, even Youth Obsessed America, during the February Fashion Week, the 20 major fashion brands, 100% of them had at least one model over the age of 50. Fantastic! Love it. And many of the models that they used were in their 70s. Love that. Finally, we're getting past this. And by the way, these women were all plastic surgeryed out. Maybe a little Botox, but mostly they were kind of a little bit more natural makeup. They didn't look, overly whatever. We know that, now the celebrities are jumping on board. Gwyneth, of course, Goop, how could she miss it? Halle Berry, Naomi Watts, they're all in their 50s and they're talking about menopause. They're out there talking about their experience with perimenopause and menopause, and I think maybe even shilling for some companies, or Goop is, I'm sure they've got some fantastically $20,000 something you can take for your menopause. For those of you who have a lot of money. But here's the thing. We have to recognize that the majority of the wealth in this country is concentrated in the hands of people who are over 55. 70% of the wealth in the country, and the people over 55 represent 45%, so almost half of all consumer spending power. All of it is mostly in the hands of older people. So you know what? Yeah, we are the ones that are buying the creams and buying the Tommy Copper, backache straps and, icy hot patches and anything else we can get our hands on. As we get older, we don't want to hurt, right? And we want to look good as we possibly can. So anyway, I'm just happy to know that older Americans are getting their due, not being overlooked, not being pushed aside, and certainly not being pushed out of society. So congrats to the UK for their centenarian celebration. We should start doing something here, I think, in the US that is more at that level, maybe at the White House. And also congrats to Vogue for finally getting it, and for finally seeing the beauty in an older woman. We thank you. That's a wrap for Caregiving Club Newscast this week. We hope you enjoyed these news segments. You can email us at info@caregivingclub.com to let us know a news story we should cover, or leave us a comment on our YouTube page. And don't forget to subscribe to our Caregiving Club YouTube channel to get all the caregiving news every other week, as well as our other content, our Me Time Monday Self-Care in 7 Minutes weekly videos, and our Caregiving Club On Air podcasts, which are available on our Caregiver Club YouTube channel, as well as Apple, Amazon, Spotify, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, and other podcast listening channels. Find out more about Sherri and Caregiving Club at caregivingclub.com. Take care and stay well.